First of all, let me thank the League of Conservation Voters for the award. It is greatly appreciated. It means a lot, it really does. You know, the League of Conservation Voters has multiple tasks. It works to increase the number of supporters of the environment, make sure they get elected. So we have to beat on fewer doors and try to convince people because they come in convinced. But besides electing people to the legislature, when we have to push and cajole and not threaten, lobby, shall I say, they're also there. And those times when we don't have an easy majority because we've not been successful in electing those people, they're there on the front lines with the rest of you, working the halls, working lawyers' mall, trying to get those votes. And also to reinforce the point of holding those people accountable. Because getting people elected doesn't mean they're going to stay true. And they understand that better than most of us, so I want to thank them for their work on both those fronts. Obviously, I want to thank my friend Brian Frosch for the heartfelt introduction. We'll talk later. He's a close friend, and clearly he's been a leader in the environmental movement for many, many years. When John Griffin and I heard that we were receiving these awards, we texted each other, which is pretty amazing for these two over 60-year-old guys who are texting. And he, of course, said it was nice to share the podium with me, and I, of course, said the same to John. But let me just say, and most of you know it, many of you have worked with John over the years, he's a caring, solid, honorable person. And he's a man with great heart and great integrity, and he's very, very deserving. So, John, congratulations. I believe that the struggles we face today, and even our successful efforts, are largely a result of the struggles that came before us. And we, to some degree, are also a creation of the giants who led those struggles. You've seen a few of them tonight, and I want to refer back to them. And I think learning from those giants is particularly true for me. I couldn't have imagined being here when I first came into the legislature, nor do I believe I would be without those people, those giants. I entered the legislature as a strong supporter of the environment, but not with a long history of activism or scientific knowledge. I might have gotten a C or D, I think, in biology, so forgive me. But as I was coming in, Governor Harry Hughes was leaving as governor. And while he left as governor, he never left the stage of being a true, staunch, honorable supporter of the environment. He's one of those giants. I haven't already referred to Joe Tidings, who's a friend of mine, who's still in the ass kicking, and I love it. So this is the language I know young people. Joe Tidings, again, another one of those guys. In the House, as Brian said, we were both assigned to environmental matters. At least the environment mattered to two of us on the committee. But that's another story. But we always knew that in the Senate, Gerald Weingrab would get stuff done. And he did. And he too is a giant. He's not here tonight, but Gerald is a fighter, and he's still fighting. But he kept things going during those early years. I know Brian and I felt that having Gerald there was very, very important. But most of those times, I have to be honest, I was part of the supporting cast. Brian and I, a few years later, moved over to the Senate, to the precursor to EAG, and Brian became chair in the Environment Subcommittee, always doing a great job, but his stay was not to be, and he was, I guess, promoted to being chair of JPR. Now, it seems we may lose him again as he moves towards becoming our next Attorney General. So I became the chair, but it was on one condition, and that was that the experts, the grassroots organizers were directly linked to our legislative efforts, that they couldn't be separated, that if I was going to be successful, if I was going to be able to do the job, I had to have those experts those grassroots folks, clear right next to me so we could work in sync. And I think that's been very important. And I said, I was willing to be a voice, a floor leader, offer strategic advice. But I believed then, and I still believe now, that in the end, building a broad dynamic movement would be the decisive factor in our ability to recover from the degradation of our environment and conversion to a sustainable one. I believed then, I believe today. When the wave of public sentiment is strong enough and can't be deterred, that's when we're going to win. When my colleagues have no choice but to vote pro-environment, that's when we win. John had his list, so I have a small list too, of some lessons that I think we've all learned over the years. When we were working on what was then the 4P bill, the 4 pollutant bill, a number of years ago, a number of us met and we started strategizing for the upcoming session after 2 years of not much success. And so we started talking about it, and we realized that if in fact we passed the bill, we could be faced with a veto that could hang over our head by that one-term governor of some years ago. So we started by saying, what would the headline look like? Governor vetoes 4P bill? Not so great. We said, what about governor vetoes Healthy Air Act? We figured the last one was a better one if we were going to go down that road. So we started by changing the name of the bill. But more importantly, as we got into the session, and those who were there can remember, you couldn't go anywhere in the halls of Annapolis and avoid the lobbying, the meetings, the dropping of postcards, the demonstrations, the lawyers' mall. I mean, the energy was electric. It was stunning. And I think the lesson there was that every organization that I'm aware of were coordinated, were focused, put their organizational strength behind passing that bill. And the second important point I think of that campaign was that during that session, when you looked around, it wasn't just the usual suspects. You had nurses, you had doctors, you had Department of Public Health, you had Johns Hopkins, you had religious leaders. And the coalition was so expanded that it simply couldn't be ignored by my colleagues. Some would have liked to ignore it, but the fact is they couldn't. So before long, late in March, early April, I remember that I, along with my friend, my sidekick, my partner in crime, Brad Hevner, were sitting in my office negotiating with Paul Allen and John Quinn. I saw John here earlier from Constellation. He's over there. He probably remembers when we got near the end and it looked like we had the votes and we were negotiating the final steps, and personally I had to pinch myself really to believe we had gotten that far. And that bill ended up being a landmark legislation. The Washington Post had an article a couple weeks ago about the significant reduction in emissions in coal-fired power plants. And it was because of those lessons, that work of many people in this room that we were successful in that. And I think it did lead the way across the country. One footnote to that. As many of you know, bills are signed after session on the second floor with hoopla, with pomp and ceremony, and all the stakeholders come, pictures are taken, and occasionally a bill is signed during session. If it has a lot of publicity and picture opportunities and photo ops, etc. But as we reached the end of that session that year, this was 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, I was driving to Annapolis around 8:30, 8:45, and my aide calls me. Hands-free, and he said, the governor's going to sign the Healthy Air Act. I said, that's great. He said, well, there's more to the message. He said, he's signing it now. Well, this is 8:45 in the morning on a Wednesday or Thursday morning. And clearly there had been no notice, no press, and no fanfare. And no sponsor, and none of the stakeholders, none of you were invited. So, on the floor I was righteously indignant, but I had to snicker that he didn't want any of us, any of you there, to bask in the glory of that successful struggle. And I think there was a lesson there somewhere. And I always appreciate it, and it always brings to mind our success. However much it was an attempt to ignore it, we know it was the right thing to do, and we followed correctly. There have been other battles, other victories. Brian mentioned a few, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act this last session because of the department, the agency, the governor, obviously, the septics bill to reduce sprawl, the arsenic bill, and many others. And two other quick lessons, and I'll get out of the way so people can get to watch the game. What science leads us to offer a solution, or a direction science leads us, is what we need to follow. We shouldn't start with what's possible, but rather what is needed. Now, the legislative process is modulating enough. We really have to be careful of self-censoring ourselves. Many of you who walk the halls of Annapolis know that bills are going to be amended, they're going to be weakened, they're going to be softened during the normal course of events. Now that doesn't mean we plow rigidly, dogmatically ahead, hell or high water. But it does mean that we say, if this is what science is saying we have to do to protect our environment, to save our environment, to reverse the degradation, that's where we should head. And if in the course of things it gets softened, it gets weakened, it gets amended, so be it. But we have to be very careful, that we don't censor ourselves too early, because it's like negotiating against yourself. And I think there have been times where we've been clear and not done that, but unfortunately there have also been times that we made mistakes early on. And I think that's one lesson, I think, from my experience, and I think our experiences. And another lesson to tell you, and this one is fairly obvious, is it's a hell of a lot easier having a friend as governor, and on the second floor, Martin O'Malley and Harrison Mandel, and those people who made life a lot easier. Let me conclude with one thought. In all of these successful efforts, and we have had a lot of successful efforts, and this last session was a terrific session, now we just have to make sure things are implemented. But our success came as a result of our being able to create a division of labor. We have environmental institutions that provide scientific expertise and resources. We have grassroots organizations and people mobilizing like the Mike Tidwells of the world who do a great job. We offer demonstrations. We have coalition builders. We have people who offer strategic advice. And of course we have the funders and contributors who make the aforementioned possible. We shouldn't forget that. So the Keep Campers of the world, obviously, you've heard from at least one state agency, having friendly state agency and people in those departments who give you support, advice, and expertise is also important. And yes, some elected leaders to give voice and advice to those demands, to that advocacy. And I'm proud, I am proud, to play a role in that division of labor. I'm proud to receive this honor tonight, but most of all, I'm proud to be part of this collective effort, and I want to underline collective effort. Because tonight, because of your work, I want to thank you and say that I want to share this award with you. Thank you.